We talk a lot about preparing for disasters, stocking up on food, securing a water source, fortifying our homes. But one thing that doesn't get nearly enough attention is the people factor. Because when SHTF, the biggest threat isn't just hunger or exposure or even violence. It's the wrong person getting too close. Maybe it's a stranger at your door with a sob story. Maybe it's an old neighbor who suddenly remembers you were the prepper. Maybe it's even someone inside your group who starts pushing boundaries. In survival situations, trust is a liability. And knowing when to say no can be the difference between making it through or losing everything. I'm here to talk about exactly that. When to trust, when to say no, and why. More often than not, being cautious or even flat-out refusing someone's request is the best step you can take. This conversation matters because when resources run low, many individuals who once played by the rules might turn to manipulation, theft, or worse to survive. And while cooperating with others can sometimes be beneficial, especially for gathering skills and labor, you need to keep in mind that allowing an unvetted person into your home or group can unravel everything you've worked for. Over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to break down the major ideas that can guide your decision-making process in a survival emergency. I'll paint a clear picture of why the stakes are so high, which behaviors to watch for, and how to minimize contact in the first place, because sometimes the safest interaction is the one that never happens. And we'll also get into that tricky territory of retaliation, because in a stressful collapse, if you say no the wrong way or to the wrong person, you might stir up anger that comes back to haunt you. So, I'll show you how to handle refusals diplomatically, preserving your security without painting a giant target on your back. If you find this content valuable and you care about staying informed and prepared for real-world emergencies, consider hitting that subscribe button right now. I promise we'll keep exploring these tough but necessary topics so you can make more confident decisions if the day ever comes when you have to. Let's get started. In normal times, trust is built gradually. We have weeks or months to watch how people behave, chat over the fence, notice whether they show up on time for work, or observe if they treat their family well. But when a serious crisis collapses the frameworks that keep society running, you lose that safety net, and everything speeds up in ways you might never have imagined. You wake up one morning and the power is gone, the roads are blocked, and people around you are panicking, possibly looting or leaving en masse. In this environment, you don't get those comfortable weeks or months to evaluate who's safe or who's got a hidden agenda. You might have hours or even just minutes to decide how to interact with someone, whether you let them near your supplies or whether you pretend you have nothing to give at all. This shift puts enormous psychological pressure on everyone. People can change dramatically under stress. The calm, responsible coworker you remember might morph into someone who lies and deceives to get extra food. A neighbor who used to wave hello each morning might start plotting to break in and steal what you have once they realize their own pantry is empty. The heartbreak is that desperation can drive even good folks to do terrible things. This is the fundamental reason so many preparedness-minded people advocate for a default stance of caution. In a survival emergency, you just don't know how far someone is willing to go. Trust becomes a high-stakes gamble. When people are starving or terrified, they might cling to any perceived safe haven. If word gets out that you have extra resources, your door might become a magnet for strangers seeking help. Sometimes they may ask politely, sometimes they may demand. And if you let them in without a careful vetting process, you risk giving them a front-row seat to your resources and defense measures. On top of that, once they've seen your supplies, it's nearly impossible to unring that bell. You can't erase that knowledge from their minds. That's how a simple gesture of sympathy might turn into a big security hole. As if that weren't enough, you also have to consider the subtle manipulations and forced moral dilemmas that arise. A person might hold a crying child in front of you, pleading for medicine, and that could be entirely genuine. Or it could be a staged move to make you drop your guard. So your mind will be in a constant state of tension between trying to preserve compassion and needing to protect your home or group. Over the long run, it's that unrelenting stress that wears people down, causing them to second-guess every decision, fear every knock at the door, and even avoid venturing outside. Survival in such an atmosphere requires a structured strategy, knowing your priorities, establishing a framework for how you handle requests, and training yourself to say no when it's the better call. It's also important to acknowledge that many people, including some in your own group, may crave human connection and feel guilty turning others away. It's normal to feel pity for those who are suffering. But in times of real collapse, you often have to consider your own survival first. Remember this: you cannot help others if you yourself are rendered helpless by running out of food, being overrun by bandits, or exposing your group to disease. It's a cruel truth, but it's still the truth. That's why maintaining a guarded approach, and sometimes actively avoiding strangers or turning them away, is not about being cruel for its own sake. It's about preserving the possibility that you and your immediate circle can carry on, so that maybe one day, you'll be in a position to rebuild or extend support on safer terms. All of this sets the stage for why these decisions are so thorny, and why the fallback stance of refusal often wins out. But there are nuances, and we're going to unpack them in detail. Let's move on to discussing some mindsets and strategies that can help you assess risks, spot potential threats, and think ahead before you ever open the door. One of the first things you have to establish in a collapse scenario is your hierarchy of priorities. For most people, that starts with securing your family or closest loved ones, then ensuring you have enough food, water, and medical supplies for a set period, and finally looking into ways to stay informed, stay warm, and stay out of conflict. Within that hierarchy, you need to acknowledge that giving away resources or letting unfamiliar people see what you have can undermine your entire plan. It's often said in preparedness circles that you never want to appear as though you're well-stocked or living in luxury when everyone else is scrounging for crumbs. That can paint a target on your back faster than you might believe. On top of that, it's crucial to embrace a mindset of operational security, often shortened to OPSEC, which means you keep details about your supplies, capabilities, and vulnerabilities as hidden as possible. In day-to-day life, you might have shared pictures of your latest haul from a wholesale store or posted about your garden yields online. But in a genuine crisis, that habit can invite disaster. If you talk too freely, you may become known as the person with everything, the gold mine that others feel entitled to tap. So from the outset, train yourself to reveal less information than you think is necessary. If someone asks how you're doing, a simple "we're managing, but it's been tough" is enough. You don't owe them a full inventory list. Another fundamental strategy is developing a system for evaluating potential trust. That might sound formal, but it can be as simple as a set of internal questions you run through whenever someone crosses your path. Are they consistent in their stories? Do their eyes dart around when they talk, especially if you mention anything of value? Do they seem overly curious about your layout, your water supply, or your security? And if you catch someone in a lie once, do you really want to give them a second chance when your life is at stake? These are the sorts of questions you'll need to be ready to ask yourself, quickly and calmly. If you operate as part of a small community or survival group, you'll also want to formalize how you make decisions about outsiders. That might mean holding group discussions in a safe, neutral spot, or designating one or two people to handle the initial contact, while others remain unseen but ready to step in. The approach ensures nobody acts impulsively out of pity or fear, giving the group a structure that fosters consistency in deciding who's allowed any sort of entry. You don't want the entire group crowding around a stranger, revealing how many people you have, the ages of children, or how many able-bodied defenders are present. Of course, mindsets and strategies only help if you maintain discipline under stress. In an actual collapse, tension is high, sleep might be scarce, and you'll be juggling countless worries: food rationing, water purification, personal hygiene, and the mental well-being of everyone in your camp. Slipping up is easy. You might find yourself letting your guard down just to have a normal conversation for a change. That's why it's so important to rehearse these stances mentally, even role-play them if you can beforehand. How you greet someone, what you say or don't say, and how you gracefully pivot to a refusal if they start asking for more than you can give. That mental preparation can make the difference between a quick, confident refusal that sends a stranger on their way versus a stumbling attempt to say no that invites them to push harder. Always remember, your first duty in a crisis is to preserve what you need for your immediate group's survival. Any trust that compromises that is too costly. With that in mind, let's dig deeper into the kinds of behavioral cues and signals you should watch for when new individuals come knocking. It's often said that actions speak louder than words, and that's never truer than in a high-stakes environment. While someone might claim they come in peace or that they have valuable skills, You can glean a lot by watching their body language, their consistency in conversation, and how they respond to small tests. When a stranger approaches, consider their posture. Do they walk steadily and with purpose? Or do they look like they're sneaking around and constantly scanning your surroundings as though they're mapping your property? Do they over-explain why they're visiting or try to push the conversation toward what sort of resources you have? If you sense they're hunting for intel about how many supplies you might own, that's an immediate sign to lock down information, shorten the conversation, and possibly tell them you can't help. Look for subtle clues about desperation or possible deception. For instance, if someone claims they're from a city several hundred miles away, but they can't mention a single landmark from that region, or get their story straight about how they arrived, it may mean they're lying. On the other hand, if they look physically worn, show consistent details about where they came from, and aren't specifically probing about your stash, they might at least be telling the truth about being a traveler in need. That doesn't mean you must invite them in, but you can glean they might not be an immediate threat. Nonetheless, remain on guard. Also pay attention to contradictions in their recounting of events. If they say, "My vehicle ran out of gas last week, so I've been walking since then," and then later mention driving to a town yesterday, you know there's a mismatch. It's these small, seemingly trivial statements that can reveal hidden motives. Even if you don't confront them on the spot, you'll have the knowledge that you're dealing with someone who isn't being straight with you, which is reason enough to say no if they request aid or access. Another layer to consider is how quickly they want personal information from you. People who jump straight to, "So how many folks are in your group?" or "Where do you keep your supplies?" should set off alarms. No one in a genuine plight needs those specifics to politely ask for a bit of help, and if they immediately start praising you, saying things like, "I've heard you're the one with the real setup," that's also a red flag. They might be testing your ego or fishing to confirm rumors. If you're dealing with a potential group who wants to form an alliance, try to see how they treat their own members. Are they respectful, or is there tension? If they can't maintain solidarity among themselves, inviting them into your space can multiply your problems. Remember, you want to watch what they do when they think nobody's looking. If you're in a position to observe them from a distance before they realize you're there, you might notice them rummaging through your perimeter, scanning for easy break-ins, or quietly communicating with someone else. The presence of hidden associates is an especially big concern, as they could be preparing an ambush or infiltration. All of these subtle signals help you build a picture of who you're dealing with, and once you gather enough cues, you can decide whether it's feasible to deal with them at all, or if it's time to send them on their way. Often the safer choice is to decline any deeper interactions, especially if you catch even a whiff of deceit or aggression. That might sound harsh, but in a world where the stakes are amplified, a single slip can bring ruin. Now let's talk about how to minimize contact from the beginning, so you can avoid a lot of these interactions altogether. Sometimes the surest way to prevent trouble is to avoid contact in the first place. After all, if someone doesn't realize you have resources, or if they can't even detect your presence, they're far less likely to knock on your door or attempt to break in. This is where the concept of the gray man strategy comes into play. In essence, you adopt an appearance and behavior that blends in, suggesting you're no better off than anyone else, or maybe you're not even worth noticing at all. If you're out in public during a crisis, you don't dress in pristine tactical gear that screams, "I'm well prepped." You keep it low-key, wearing neutral clothing, avoiding brandishing any flashy equipment. When you talk, you don't brag or mention your supplies, you sound as uncertain as everyone else. This helps you slip under the radar. The same principle applies to your home or retreat location. If possible, avoid outward signs of having electricity, large stockpiles of food, or advanced security measures. That means if you have a generator, try running it during times when others might not notice so easily, or at least muffle the noise. Keep lights dim or shielded so they don't shine like a beacon in a dark neighborhood. The less attention you draw, the fewer people will approach. And if you can conceal your garden behind fences or netting, or stash your supply items in a way that's not visible through windows, that's even better. You might also choose to limit your presence outside. Some folks in a crisis scenario will deliberately appear to have left or abandoned their home, making it look uninviting or even partially looted, so that opportunistic strangers think there's nothing left to take. It's a bit of a gamble, but for those who can't relocate, it's one way to deter casual thieves. The alternative is to remain inside as much as possible, only venturing out for essential tasks, and doing so at times when you're less likely to be spotted. This can help keep large groups from converging on your door with requests or demands. If you do need to interact for trading or gathering information, consider designated neutral locations away from your main residence. That way, if something goes wrong, you're not giving them a direct path back to your stockpile or your family. By controlling where and when these interactions take place, you maintain an advantage and can quickly disengage if things take a turn. One of the biggest benefits of minimizing contact is that it preserves your mental energy. The fewer strangers or desperate individuals you have to face, the less you'll be forced to wrestle with the moral agony of saying no, or the fear of letting the wrong person see inside your world. You also lower the chance of stoking jealousy among neighbors who might resent your level of preparedness. So while it can be lonely and it may lead some people to label you as antisocial, in a real SHTF environment, that may be exactly what keeps you and your loved ones safe. Now, sometimes you can't avoid interaction altogether, and if you do say no to someone in dire need, you risk another problem: retaliation. No matter how politely or firmly you turn someone away, there is a chance they'll react badly. Desperation can breed anger, and anger can morph into vengeful thoughts. They turned me away, so I'm going to break in later. Or, if they won't share, then I'll take it by force. This is the dark side of refusing help. So how do you lower the odds of retaliation without compromising your security? First, the way you frame your refusal matters. Instead of a blatant, "We've got plenty but we're not giving you anything," which can spark rage, a more cautious approach is to claim limited resources. Something along the lines of, "I'm sorry, but we're barely hanging on ourselves. We wish we could help, but there's almost nothing left." That can diffuse some anger because it shifts the situation from "you won't help me" to "you can't help me." Of course, if the person in front of you is extremely desperate or irrational, no phrasing might truly protect you. But it's worth trying to lessen the animosity. If they push further, you can mention alternatives that are not tied to your own location. Maybe there's a rumored relief station or a local distribution point that has been set up, or there's a known stream where they can filter water. Even pointing them to a place that may or may not be functioning can sometimes redirect their focus. But be cautious not to say anything like, "I heard the neighbors are well stocked," or you might create a chain of violence that eventually circles back to you. Sometimes, though, a polite refusal still leads to threats. You might hear something like, "We know you've got more than you're letting on. If you don't share, we'll come back with friends." In a scenario like that, you have to walk a fine line. If you show fear, you risk emboldening them. If you escalate aggressively, you might spark immediate conflict. It's often best to respond with calm, unwavering confidence, making it clear you will defend your property, but you have no interest in violence. This is where having visible deterrents, like signs of basic fortification or even quietly displayed defensive tools, can dissuade someone from following through on revenge. But you can't ignore the fact that they might still come back. That's one reason many people develop layers of defense or plan for fallback positions. You might not want to rely on just a single locked door if you're dealing with a resentful neighbor or stranger who feels cheated. You might want perimeter alarms, whether they're simple cans on a string or more advanced motion detectors if you can power them. One or two individuals standing watch at night can go a long way toward making your location less appealing as a target. Retaliation is a real threat, and there is no perfect way to guarantee it won't happen. Sometimes your best shield is making it appear that you truly have very little to offer, or that trying to take your scraps would be more trouble than it's worth. That said, complete isolation isn't always practical in a long-term crisis. Let's shift gears now and talk about cautious ways to build alliances or accept help if you must, because total isolation can also be risky if it extends indefinitely. In a truly long-lasting collapse, no one can do absolutely everything alone forever. You might be excellent at security, but you'll need someone with medical expertise if a group member falls ill. Or maybe you're a great gardener, but can't tackle building repairs. That reality is why forming or joining a small group, or at least maintaining friendly relations with certain neighbors, can be a huge advantage. Still, the question is how to do that without ending up with a wolf in sheep's clothing within your gates. A common approach is incremental trust. Instead of inviting a new acquaintance into your house on day one, you give them small, carefully controlled tasks to see how they behave. For instance, If they claim they can fix water filters, you might hand them a cheap or less vital device and see if they follow through, or if they vanish with it. If they do a solid job and return it in good working order, you've gathered a positive data point. If they fail to show up or behave suspiciously, then you know it's not worth deeper collaboration. This method can extend to everything from security patrols to gardening to cooking. Always start with tasks that won't ruin you if they mess up or try to steal. Similarly, you can manage the flow of information. Maybe you're curious about this person's background, but you don't share your entire life story. You focus on casual conversation, where they grew up, what they did before the collapse, how they've been managing. If they lie about something basic, you know it early. If they're consistent, that's another small plus. Over time, you gather enough interactions that you can make a more educated guess about whether they're trustworthy. Until then, they stay at arm's length. You might consider letting them in on communal tasks, like building a perimeter fence with others, without giving them unsupervised access to your core storage. It's also wise to compartmentalize. If you're part of a group that's setting rules for how new members join, you might break down responsibilities so that no one newcomer can learn everything at once. For instance, a new person doesn't automatically know where you keep all your backups, nor do they see the entire stash of medical supplies. They might only handle security on the west side or help maintain the garden. That way, if they turn out to be a threat and leave or try to betray you, they won't have a full map of your defenses and stockpiles. Sometimes you'll encounter folks who have a specialized skill you can't easily replicate. It might be tempting to skip the incremental approach because you desperately need what they offer. Fight that urge. No matter how valuable their skill, letting them roam freely can be disastrous if their intentions are not good. It's better to negotiate a structured arrangement. For instance, we can trade you some essential items if you provide your medical expertise for 1 day a week. Then observe them carefully during that period. If they demand permanent access or want to move in immediately, that's a red flag. Even when you do find allies, it's important to maintain a certain baseline of caution. Everyone is under stress, and even an ally might betray you if they perceive it as necessary to save their family or themselves. That might sound cold, but it's just the nature of survival situations. Stay alert, even among people you've decided to trust somewhat. And always have a plan for how you'd handle things if the relationship sours. That plan might include fallback areas, hidden caches, or simply a personal vow to keep critical supplies locked away. All of this can feel exhausting, but building alliances carefully is better than placing blind faith in the wrong person. Next, let's talk about some concrete tactics for protecting your space. Because trust or no trust, you'll need physical security and strict OPSEC to survive. In a stable world, a solid lock on the front door and maybe a home security system could suffice for peace of mind. In a major collapse, you have to think in layers. You start with the outermost area, the perimeter, which might include fences, natural barriers like thorny bushes, or even makeshift noise traps. The point is to detect or slow down anyone long before they reach your home. If you do have enough people, create a watch rotation so that at any given time, someone is awake and aware of approaching footsteps or suspicious movement. This constant vigilance might feel draining, but it's far less draining than waking up to an intruder rummaging through your resources. Next, consider how your home or retreat is laid out inside. Keep your most valuable supplies well hidden. This could mean a concealed basement compartment, an attic space hidden behind a false wall, or even caches buried outside. Think of it like having multiple lines of defense. Even if someone manages to get past the perimeter, they won't immediately find your main stash. If they think you're barely scraping by because they only see a small stack of canned goods, they might leave or be less motivated to keep searching. Or in the worst case, if they force you to open your visible stash, you can offer that without losing everything. Be careful with what you say over any communication devices. If you're still able to use shortwave radios or even walkie-talkies, assume someone might be listening. Don't broadcast the exact times you'll be out gathering supplies, or mention the quantity of what you have. Develop a set of code phrases among your group if possible, so you can speak in a way that's not obvious to an outsider. The same principle applies to face-to-face interactions. If you have to meet someone for a trade, do it away from your core location, and avoid talking about how you got your goods or where you store them. OPSEC extends to your personal routine as well. If you travel the same route at the same time every day, that pattern can be observed and exploited. Vary your movements, use different paths, and try to keep your group's schedule unpredictable to an outsider's eye. This doesn't mean living in total paranoia, but it does mean you never want to make things easy for someone who might be scouting you. Even with all these measures, you must accept that conflict might find you anyway. If you can, project a presence that you're capable of defending yourself, whether it's by having deterrence in clear sight, like boards with nails hammered into them around windows, or by simply conveying confidence when you speak. Desperate or opportunistic individuals often look for soft targets. If you appear to be too tough a nut to crack, they may move on. Remember though, all these precautions don't guarantee safety. They just lower the chances of becoming an easy victim. The real question is, do you have the mental readiness to follow through on your defensive posture if push comes to shove? That might mean many different things depending on your ethical lines, the tools you have, and the circumstances. But the consistent thread through it all is discipline in what you reveal, whom you let close, and how you secure your assets. Let's bring it all home now, with a final conclusion that will tie these threads together. You've just heard a deep dive into the difficult task of deciding who to trust when the world as we know it has crumbled. We talked about the immense pressure that arises when resources are scarce, how quickly desperation can change a person, and why your best strategy is often to keep people away in the first place. We explored subtle cues to watch for in someone's behavior, the importance of gradually building trust through small tests if you must let anyone in at all, and how crucial it is to protect your supplies through layered security and strict operational security. We also touched on the risks that come with refusing someone's plea. You can never fully eliminate the chance they'll retaliate after being turned away, but it's still wiser to preserve your family's well-being than to risk it on the shaky assumption that every stranger has good intentions. Sometimes saying no puts you in a safer position, though it can weigh heavily on your conscience. That's part of the psychological toll of surviving in a harsh reality. If there's one message to remember, it's that caution and a certain degree of isolation can save your life in a long-term crisis. While you might eventually benefit from forging alliances, rushing into it can be disastrous. Take it slow, watch for inconsistencies, keep essential information to yourself, and never reveal more than you need to. If you do decide to welcome someone into your circle, make them earn that spot through actions, not just words. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of trust and refusal in SHTF conditions. I hope this helps you prepare mentally, physically, and emotionally for the kinds of dilemmas you might face if our world ever does tip into chaos. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button, share with anyone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, consider subscribing for more discussions on survival, prepping, and practical self-reliance. Stay safe out there, keep your eyes open, and remember, often the best defense is simply the word no.